The darkness in the cell had a texture, a weight that pressed against my skin like cold, damp velvet. After 3 months, I had memorized every inch of the stone floor beneath my bare feet, every crack in the walls that surrounded me, every musty scent that wafted through the single-barred window near the ceiling. Too high for me to reach, too small for me to escape through even if I could. The single torch in the corridor outside cast just enough light for me to continue my work. My fingers moved mechanically, weaving the special herbs into intricate patterns, crushing others into fine powder. The sound of my mortar and pestle echoed against the stone walls, a rhythmic scraping that had become as natural to me as my own heartbeat. Sometimes, it was the only thing that reminded me I was still alive. "Faster!" Guard Brennan barked from outside the cell. "The nobles need their sleeping drafts by midnight. The full moon makes them restless." I didn't look up. I knew better than to meet the eyes of any guard, especially Brennan with his perpetual sneer. My long blonde hair fell forward, creating a curtain between us as I worked. Once I had been proud of my hair, the color of summer wheat. Now it was just another feature that made me vulnerable in this place, where beauty was considered more dangerous than any weapon. "I'm working as fast as I can," I whispered, my voice rough from disuse. The guard snorted. "Not fast enough. Remember what happened to the last herbalist who couldn't keep up?" I remembered all too well. Elaine had been older, weaker, her fingers gnarled with age. They'd dragged her away one night, and the screams that echoed through the stone corridors told me everything I needed to know. I never saw her again, but her absence haunted this cell almost as much as her ghost might have. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "When the world turns dark, Aurora, remember that healing hands will always find their purpose." She had passed her knowledge to me, herb by herb, season by season, until her final breath. The small wooden pendant she'd given me, carved with a wolf surrounded by healing herbs, lay hidden beneath my threadbare dress, pressed against my heart. The guards had missed it during their initial search, and it remained my only treasure, my only connection to the world I'd lost. "Time's almost up," Brennan taunted. "The moon will rise soon." As if on cue, a distant howling pierced the night, sending shivers down my spine. Not human. No, definitely not human. The sound carried with it a primal power that even the thick stone walls couldn't diminish. The werewolves were gathering. I had been captured during a raid on my village 3 months ago. I still didn't understand why they had kept me alive when so many others had been slaughtered. Not until they discovered my knowledge of herbs and healing. Apparently, even monsters needed medicine. The sudden silence from the corridor made me pause my work. Brennan's usual heavy breathing had stopped. I heard a soft thud, followed by the sound of keys jingling against stone. My heartbeat quickened as unfamiliar footsteps approached, lighter than Brennan's, more purposeful. "Is this her?" a deep voice asked. Not Brennan. This voice carried authority, power, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Yes, my king," came another voice, deferential, almost fearful. "King?" I froze, my fingers still coated with crushed valerian root. No one had mentioned a king would be visiting the dungeons tonight. "Leave us!" the first voice commanded, and I heard multiple sets of footsteps retreating. The torch in the corridor flickered, casting long shadows across my cell, as a figure appeared at the barred door. Even through the darkness, I could sense his presence, something wild and dangerous, barely contained in human form. I kept my head down, but I could feel his gaze on me like a physical touch, assessing, calculating. The lock clicked, and the cell door swung open. I didn't move, didn't dare to breathe. No one had entered my cell since they'd thrown me in here. The guards simply pushed food through a slot in the door and collected my herbal mixtures the same way. "Look at me," he said, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. I hesitated, remembering every warning I'd ever received about meeting the eyes of predators. Slowly, I lifted my gaze, following the line of expensive black boots, up past dark trousers and a fitted jacket adorned with silver emblems of rank and power, until finally, I looked into the face of the man they called King. He was beautiful, in the way dangerous things often are, sharp features, strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes that gleamed amber in the torchlight. Not human eyes, wolf eyes. "Your name," he demanded, though there was no harshness in his tone. "Aurora," I whispered, the sound strange in my own ears after weeks of near silence. He stepped closer, and I instinctively pressed my back against the wall. A hint of amusement flickered across his features, quickly replaced by something more serious. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. I shook my head slightly. I had heard whispers among the guards, rumors of a king who ruled both wolves and men, but nothing more. "I am Dominic, Alpha King of the Northern Territories." He paused, watching my reaction. When I showed none, too frozen with fear to respond, he continued, "I've heard you're quite skilled with herbs, that you create remedies no one else can replicate." I remained silent, unsure if this was some kind of trap. "Your silence won't protect you," he said, but there was no threat in his words. "I've come to make you an offer." What kind of offer?" My voice was barely audible, even to my own ears. He took another step forward, close enough now that I could smell him. Forest and night air and something wild. "Work for me, directly. Not in this cell, but in the royal wing. I need someone with your particular talents." I blinked, trying to process his words. "Why would you want me?" A shadow passed over his face. "That's not your concern. What should concern you is that I'm offering you a way out of this cell." He gestured around at the damp stones, the meager pallet that served as my bed, the single bowl of water for washing. "Unless you prefer these accommodations?" I swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" His eyes hardened slightly. "Then you stay here, continuing to make sleeping drafts for nobles who don't appreciate your skill, until your fingers bleed and your mind breaks." He leaned closer. "I'm not in the habit of making offers twice, Aurora." The way he said my name sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. No one had spoken my name in months, not with anything resembling respect. "What would I be making for you?" I asked, caution threading through my words. "Something more challenging than sleeping drafts." He glanced at the herbs spread before me. "Something that requires real talent." Before I could respond, shouts erupted from somewhere down the corridor. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body tensing like a predator preparing to strike. "We don't have time for this," he growled. "Choose now." I looked around at my prison, at the herbs that had kept me alive only because I was useful. Then I looked at him, this dangerous man with wolf's eyes who offered an escape I never thought possible. "I'll go with you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could reconsider. Something like satisfaction flickered across his face. He reached for my arm, but then paused, looking at my herb-stained hands. Without warning, he shrugged off his outer jacket, a beautiful garment made of black leather that probably cost more than everything in my village combined, and wrapped it around my shoulders. "Come," he said, and this time when he reached for me, his hand closed gently around my wrist. The heat of his skin against mine was shocking after months of isolation. He pulled me to my feet, and I stumbled, my legs weak from disuse. Without hesitation, he steadied me, his arm sliding around my waist. I flinched at the contact, and he immediately loosened his grip, though he didn't let go entirely. "Can you walk?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. My bare feet felt numb against the cold stone. He led me out of the cell, past Brennan's unconscious form slumped against the wall. I tried not to look, afraid to feel any satisfaction at the guard's condition. We moved through the torch-lit corridor quickly, the shouts growing louder behind us. "What's happening?" I whispered. "A distraction," he replied curtly. "Arranged to facilitate your removal." We reached a narrow staircase, spiraling upward. I hadn't seen these stairs when they'd brought me down months ago, blindfolded and terrified. As we climbed, the air gradually became fresher, the oppressive weight of the dungeon lifting with each step. My legs trembled with the effort, but the thought of returning to that cell kept me moving. At the top of the stairs, a door opened onto a courtyard bathed in moonlight. I gasped, momentarily blinded by the brightness after so long in dim torchlight. The full moon hung low in the sky, impossibly large and luminous. More howls pierced the night, closer now. Dominic's grip on me tightened. "We need to move faster," he said, his voice taking on a rougher quality. "The moon affects us all." I didn't ask who us all referred to. I already knew. We crossed the courtyard swiftly, keeping to the shadows. Guards ran past in the distance, shouting orders, too preoccupied with whatever distraction Dominic had arranged to notice us. The cool night air felt intoxicating against my skin, and the vastness of the open sky above made me dizzy after so long confined. Dominic led me toward a smaller building connected to what I assumed was the main castle. The Royal Wing, he had called it. Each step took me further from my prison and deeper into unknown territory. I clutched his jacket tighter around my shoulders, inhaling his scent embedded in the leather. Pine and smoke and something untamed. Why me? I couldn't help asking as we paused in the shadow of an archway. There must be other herbalists, ones not locked in dungeons. He glanced down at me, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. None with your particular knowledge of wolfsbane and silver sage, I froze. Those herbs were known for one purpose only: controlling werewolves. My mother had taught me their properties in whispers, warning me never to speak of them aloud. Seeing my expression, Dominic's mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Did you think I didn't know what you were creating in that cell? Those weren't simple sleeping drafts. My heart pounded so hard I was certain he could hear it. The guard said, "The guards know nothing," he cut in. "But I know everything that happens in my kingdom, including what herbs are requested and what mixtures are created." I tried to pull away, suddenly certain I'd made a terrible mistake. But his grip held firm. "Don't misunderstand me," he said, his voice low. "I'm not angry. In fact, your knowledge is precisely why I need you." Before I could respond, a howl rose from somewhere much too close, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Dominic cursed under his breath. "Time to go," he said, pulling me forward again. We rushed through a side door, entering a warm, torch-lit corridor lined with tapestries depicting hunting scenes and battles. The contrast with the dungeon was jarring: polished wood floors instead of rough stone, the scent of beeswax candles instead of mold and waste. We climbed another staircase, this one wider and carpeted. My bare feet sank into the soft material, a luxury I had forgotten existed. At the top, Dominic stopped before a heavy wooden door, ornately carved with the same wolf symbol that adorned my mother's pendant. He released my wrist to retrieve a key from his pocket, and I swayed slightly without his support. 3 months in that cell had weakened me more than I'd realized. "These will be your quarters," he said, pushing open the door. "Mine are across the hall. You'll work in the adjoining room." He gestured to another door visible inside. "Everything you need should be there." I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly afraid. What awaited me here could be worse than the cell below. Dominic seemed to sense my fear. His expression softened slightly. "You're not a prisoner here, Aurora. You're under my protection now." He paused. "Though I wouldn't advise trying to leave the castle. Not everyone shares my appreciation for your talents." I stepped inside, overwhelmed by the sight of a real bed with pillows and blankets, a fireplace already lit and warming the room, a copper bath in one corner, windows, actual windows with glass instead of bars, looked out onto the moonlit grounds. "Rest tonight," Dominic said, remaining in the doorway. "Tomorrow, we'll discuss what I need you to create." I turned to face him, gathering what courage I had left. "And what exactly is that?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable there, something almost human. "A cure," he said simply. "I need you to create a cure." Before I could ask what he needed curing from, he stepped back, closing the door between us. The lock clicked, and despite his words about me not being a prisoner, I was once again confined, albeit in much more comfortable surroundings. I stood there in the silent room, still wrapped in his jacket, the scent of him all around me. Outside, the wolves continued to howl at the full moon, and I wondered what I had agreed to. What kind of cure would the alpha king of werewolves possibly need? As I moved toward the windows, drawn by the silvery light, my hand drifted to the wooden pendant against my chest. My mother's final gift, carved with the same wolf symbol that adorned Dominic's door. Not a coincidence, I was certain. I had escaped one prison only to enter another, bound now to a king with wolf's eyes, and secrets as dark as the cell I'd left behind. But as I looked out at the moon-washed landscape, at the freedom that lay just beyond my reach, I couldn't bring myself to regret my choice. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new mysteries. Tonight, I would allow myself this small comfort, this moment of respite before facing whatever Dominic truly wanted from me. Sleep eluded me that night despite the soft bed and warm blankets. Luxuries my body had forgotten how to accept. Every howl that pierced the darkness made me flinch. Every distant shout from the courtyard below sent my heart racing. I kept expecting the door to burst open, for guards to drag me back to my cell, declaring this all a cruel joke. Dawn arrived with gentle persistence. Pale light filtering through the windows I'd been afraid to approach during the night. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching from tension rather than from sleeping on a stone floor. Dominic's jacket still lay draped across the foot of the bed where I'd carefully placed it, its leather soft and supple beneath my fingertips as I reached for it. A knock at the door made me start. "Enter," I called, my voice still rough and uncertain. The door opened to reveal a young woman carrying a tray. She had sharp features and watchful eyes that took in everything about me in a single glance. Not human. I could tell immediately from the way she moved. Too fluid, too aware. "The king sent me to assist you," she said, placing the tray on a small table near the window. "I'm Naomi." "Aurora," I offered, though she likely already knew. "Yes," she confirmed, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "The herbalist." She moved to a wardrobe I hadn't noticed the night before, and opened it to reveal several dresses, simple but well made. "These should fit you. Once you've eaten, I'll show you to the workroom." I eyed the tray, fresh bread, fruit, and something that smelled like meat. My stomach clenched painfully at the sight. "Thank you," I said, moving cautiously toward the food. Naomi watched me for a moment. "No one here will harm you," she said suddenly. "Not while you're under the king's protection." I looked up sharply. "And how long will that last?" Her expression remained neutral. "That depends on you, doesn't it?" She turned toward the door. "I'll return shortly. There's water for washing behind that screen." After she left, I ate slowly, savoring each bite, careful not to make myself ill after months of thin gruel and stale bread. The water in the basin was warm, scented with lavender, and I nearly wept at the simple pleasure of being clean again. I chose the simplest dress from the wardrobe, soft gray wool that fell to my ankles, covering the bruises and scrapes from my time in the cell. Naomi returned as promised, leading me through corridors far grander than those we'd traversed the night before. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating tapestries and paintings that lined the walls, scenes of forests and mountains, of wolves running beneath moons of various phases. "The king is occupied with council matters this morning," she explained as we walked. "He instructed me to show you the workroom and ensure you have everything you need." We stopped before a heavy oak door, which Naomi unlocked with a key from her pocket. "This key is yours," she said, handing it to me. "The king has the only other copy." The workroom beyond the door took my breath away. Sunlight poured through a wall of windows overlooking a garden. Shelves lined with jars of herbs, roots, and flowers covered 2 entire walls. A massive work table dominated the center of the room, its surface smooth from years of use. Equipment I had only dreamed of, glass vials, copper stills, silver mixing bowls, was arranged meticulously on smaller tables. "This was his mother's workroom," Naomi said quietly. "No one has used it since she died." I turned to her in surprise. His mother was an herbalist? Something flashed in Naomi's eyes. Caution, perhaps. "She had many talents," she replied carefully. "The garden below contains most of the common herbs you might need. For anything more specialized, you'll need to submit requests." I nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. My knowledge of wolfsbane and silver sage would be closely monitored here. "The king will visit you this afternoon," Naomi continued. "Until then, he suggested you familiarize yourself with the supplies." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Aurora, the windows don't open. For your protection, of course." After she left, I spent hours exploring the workroom, running my fingers over dried herbs, opening jars to inhale scents both familiar and exotic. My mother would have wept with joy at such a collection. I found myself talking to her as I worked, a habit I'd developed in my cell when loneliness threatened to consume me. "Look at this, Mother," I whispered, holding up a jar of rare desert sage. "And this," touching a bundle of mountain thyme hanging from the ceiling. When I reached the back corner of the room, I froze. There, partially hidden behind larger containers, sat a small wooden box carved with familiar symbols, protection runes my mother had taught me to recognize. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside lay exactly what I'd expected: wolfsbane, silver sage, and several other herbs known for their effects on werewolves. Beneath them, wrapped in silk, I found a small leather-bound book. Its pages were filled with a woman's elegant handwriting, recipes, notes, observations about dosages and reactions. The Queen's work. It had to be. I was so absorbed in the discovery that I didn't hear the door open. Only the sensation of being watched alerted me to another presence in the room. I turned to find Dominic standing just inside the doorway, watching me with those unsettling amber eyes. He'd changed since last night, now dressed less formally in a simple white shirt and dark trousers, though he still carried himself with unmistakable authority. In daylight, he seemed both more human and more dangerous. The sharp angles of his face softened by the sun, but the power in his broad shoulders and the intensity of his gaze impossible to ignore. "I see you found my mother's special collection," he said, crossing the room toward me. I didn't try to hide the book or the box. "Why would the Queen need these herbs?" "The same reason I do now." He stopped before me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Control." "Control of what?" "Of whom?" He corrected. "Myself. Others like me." He gestured to the book in my hands. My mother created a tincture that helped us maintain our human form during the full moon. It gave us choice, rather than compulsion. I had heard stories of werewolves forced to change with the full moon, becoming mindless beasts until dawn, but I had also heard tales of werewolf royalty who could change at will, maintaining their minds even in wolf form. "You're Alpha King," I said carefully. "I thought you could control your transformations naturally." A shadow crossed his face. "Things have changed. The tincture no longer works as it once did. With each passing moon, more of my people lose control. Even I." He stopped, jaw tightening. "My mother's last batch was created 5 years ago, before her death. Its efficacy wanes with each passing year." I glanced down at the book. "And you want me to recreate it?" "No." His eyes locked with mine. "I want you to improve it. Make it stronger. Make it permanent." The enormity of what he was asking settled over me like a weight. "I don't know if that's possible." My mother believed it was. Her notes in that book, her final entries, suggest she was close to a breakthrough. He moved past me to the window, looking out at the garden below. "She died before she could complete her work." I turned pages carefully until I reached the end of the journal, where the handwriting became more hurried, the notes fragmented. The final entry mentioned something called lunar eclipse essence and heart's blood freely given, but the remaining page had been torn away. "How did she die?" I asked quietly. Dominic's shoulders tensed. "Murdered. By those who believed werewolves should embrace their beast nature, not control it." He turned back to face me. "The same faction that grows stronger with each passing moon as our control weakens." Understanding dawned slowly. "The distraction last night, an attack," he confirmed, "led by wolves who have chosen to reject their human sides entirely." His expression hardened. "They call themselves the Feral Court. And they knew you were coming for me." He nodded once. "They've infiltrated the castle guard. When they learned I planned to continue my mother's work, they tried to stop me. They'll try again." I closed the Queen's journal, my mind racing. "How long do we have?" "Before the next full moon. 26 days. His gaze was unflinching. "Will you help me, Aurora?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. I thought of my cell, of the guards who treated me like something less than human. I thought of my village, destroyed by creatures who had surrendered to their baser natures. And I thought of my mother, who had always taught me that healing was a sacred responsibility. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll try." Something like relief flickered across his features. "Good. You'll have everything you need. Naomi will act as your assistant and guard when I cannot be present." "Guard?" I repeated. "For your protection," he said, echoing Naomi's earlier words. "From the feral court?" His eyes darkened. "And from others who might not appreciate your talents." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened again, and Naomi entered carrying another tray. "Your midday meal," she announced, setting it down on a clear corner of the work table. She glanced between us, her expression revealing nothing. "Thank you, Naomi," Dominic said. "Please inform the council I'll join them shortly." After she left, Dominic moved toward the door, but paused before leaving. "One more thing, Aurora. The jacket I gave you last night, keep it close. My scent on it will warn others that you're under my protection. I thought of the jacket still lying across my bed. Is that why you gave it to me? For protection?" Something almost like embarrassment crossed his face. "Among my kind, scent marks territory. Those loyal to me won't touch what carries my scent." He hesitated. "Those who aren't loyal, well, at least I'll know who to punish if they do." With that unsettling statement, he left me alone with the Queen's journal and a task that seemed increasingly impossible. I spent the remainder of the day poring over the Queen's notes, trying to understand the complex formulation she'd developed. The basic tincture seemed straightforward enough. A careful balance of wolfsbane to suppress the change without poisoning the drinker, silver sage to maintain mental clarity, and several other herbs to buffer the toxic effects. But the improvements she'd been working on before her death involved ingredients I'd never encountered, procedures I could only guess at. As evening approached, Naomi returned to escort me back to my chambers. The corridors were busier now, and I felt eyes following us. Some curious, others openly hostile. I kept my gaze forward, but I could feel the tension surrounding us like a physical presence. "Ignore them," Naomi murmured as we passed a group of richly dressed men and women who fell silent at our approach. "Half the court fears what your presence means. The other half hopes you'll fail. And which half do you belong to?" I asked quietly. She glanced at me, a hint of respect in her eyes. "Neither. I serve the king. Nothing more, nothing less." Back in my chambers, I found a hot meal waiting and fresh water for washing. The comfort felt surreal after my time in the dungeon, yet anxiety gnawed at me. I was no longer in a cell, but I remained a prisoner all the same. Valuable only for what I could provide, my life dependent on my success. As night fell, the distant sound of howling began again, though less frenzied than during the full moon. I stood at the window, watching shadows move across the moonlit grounds below, wondering which were human and which were wolves. Behind me, Dominic's jacket lay across my bed like a promise, or a threat. Protection, he had called it, but as the howling grew closer, I wondered if anything could truly protect me in a castle full of wolves teetering on the edge of control. Days blended into one another as I immersed myself in the Queen's work. Each morning, Naomi would arrive with breakfast and news from the castle, carefully filtered, I suspected, to tell me only what Dominic wanted me to know. Each evening, she would escort me back to my chambers, where I would continue studying the Queen's journal until my eyes burned with fatigue. Dominic visited the workroom daily, sometimes only for moments, other times lingering to watch me work. His presence was both unsettling and oddly comforting, a predator who had chosen to protect rather than hunt. "You need to rest," he said on the 7th day, finding me still bent over the work table as evening approached. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my hands trembled slightly as I measured dried wolfsbane into a mortar. "There isn't time," I replied without looking up. 19 days until the full moon." He moved beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You won't help anyone if you collapse." I finally met his gaze. "I'm fine." His mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. "You're a terrible liar, Aurora." Before I could protest, he reached out and took the mortar from my hands, setting it carefully on the table. "Come, walk with me." I hesitated. "In the castle? People already stare at me like—" "Not in the castle," he interrupted. "In the garden. Fresh air will clear your mind." I blinked in surprise. "You said the windows don't open." "They don't. But doors do." He gestured toward a narrow door half hidden behind a tapestry, one I hadn't noticed before. "My mother's private entrance. It leads directly to the herb garden." The thought of being outside, of feeling the breeze on my skin after so many days confined to the workroom, was too tempting to resist. I followed him to the door, watching as he unlocked it with a key from his pocket. "You said I had the only key to the workroom," I noted. He glanced back at me, amusement flickering in his amber eyes. "I said I had the only other key to the main door. I never mentioned this one." The garden beyond was a riot of green, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Stone pathways wound between carefully tended beds of herbs, flowers, and medicinal plants. Tall hedges surrounded the perimeter, creating a private sanctuary invisible from the rest of the castle grounds. "My mother spent more time here than anywhere else," Dominic said, his voice softening as we walked. "Even as queen, she preferred plants to politics." I trailed my fingers over lavender, rosemary, and thyme, inhaling scents that reminded me of home, of my mother's garden before it was trampled beneath werewolf paws. She was talented. Her formulations are incredibly complex. She was desperate, he corrected. The madness had already begun in her time, though not as severe as now. My father was starting to lose control during the full moons. She feared for him. For all of us. I glanced at him. "Your father is dead," he said flatly. "He succumbed to the madness 3 moons after my mother's murder. I had to kill him myself when he attacked a group of children in the village." The blunt admission stunned me into silence. I tried to imagine the weight of such an action, being forced to kill your own father. But my mind shied away from the horror of it. "That's why the cure matters," Dominic continued after a moment. "Not just for me or my court, but for all werewolves. Without control, we become the monsters humans have always feared." He stopped beside a bed of night-blooming flowers just beginning to open as the sun lowered. "Without control, we destroy everything we love." I studied his profile, noticing for the first time the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He couldn't be much older than 30, yet he carried the weight of his entire species on his shoulders. "I'm not sure I can give you what you need," I said softly. "Honestly, the Queen's last notes mention ingredients I've never heard of, procedures I don't understand." He turned to face me fully. "But you're trying. That's more than anyone else has done since her death." "Why me?" The question had haunted me since the night he'd taken me from my cell. Surely there are other herbalists, ones with more experience, more resources. "None with your particular knowledge," he interrupted. "None who understand both werewolf physiology and the herbs that affect us." His gaze intensified. "And none who carry the blood of the last great human healer to work with werewolves." I froze. "What do you mean?" His hand moved to my neck, fingers gently touching the cord that held my mother's pendant beneath my dress. I hadn't realized it was visible. This symbol. It wasn't just my mother's. It belonged to a lineage of healers who worked with werewolves for generations. Your mother was the last of them. Until you. My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. My mother never said anything about working with werewolves. Perhaps she was trying to protect you, he suggested. Relations between our kinds haven't always been peaceful. The alliance was secret, known only to the royal family and a select few healers. I remembered my mother's whispered lessons about wolfsbane and silver sage. The strange symbols she'd taught me to carve into our doorframe each full moon. Protection, she'd called it. But protection from what? Or whom? "The pendant," I said, pulling it out from beneath my collar. The carved wooden wolf surrounded by healing herbs seemed to catch the fading light. "She gave it to me on her deathbed," Dominic nodded. "It's a mark of the alliance. My mother wore one similar." His fingers brushed against mine where I held the pendant, warm and surprisingly gentle. "When I saw it that first night in your cell, I knew I'd found what I'd been searching for." The realization struck me suddenly. "You didn't just happen to find me in the dungeon, did you? You've been looking for me." His expression remained unreadable. "Since my mother's murder, I've been searching for anyone connected to the healers of old. When reports came of a blonde herbalist captured during a raid, one with unusual knowledge of herbs that affect werewolves, I had to see for myself." "So you let me rot in that cell for 3 months while you decided if I was worth your time?" Anger flared unexpectedly, hot and sharp. "No," he said firmly. I only learned of your existence 2 days before I came for you. The nobles who ordered the raid kept your presence secret, afraid of what I might do if I discovered they'd captured a healer. The anger ebbed slightly. Why would they fear that? Because the alliance between werewolf royalty and human healers was always controversial among my kind. Many believe we should embrace our wolf nature completely, not seek to control it. His jaw tightened. Those same nobles are likely sympathetic to the feral court, if not actively supporting them. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm evening air. Then I'm in more danger than I realized. Yes, he admitted, but so am I. So is everyone who believes werewolves and humans can coexist peacefully. His hand moved from my pendant to my cheek, the contact brief but startling. That's why your work matters, Aurora. It's not just a cure for the madness, it's hope for peace. The weight of his words settled over me like a mantle. My mother had never spoken of this legacy, this responsibility. Had she been trying to shield me from it? Or preparing me in the only way she knew how? There's something else you should know, Dominic said, his voice lowering as though afraid of being overheard even in this private garden. My mother's murder. I believe it was connected to her research. The final page of her journal, the one that's missing. You think it contained the key to the permanent cure. I finished for him. He nodded. And I think her killer took it, which means the feral court might have it, I whispered, understanding dawning. They might know what we're missing. Exactly. His expression darkened, which means we're in a race, if we can't recreate her work before they realize what we're attempting. He didn't need to finish the thought. The implications were clear enough. We walked in silence for a while, following the winding paths as twilight deepened around us. The moon, nearly half full now, rose above the hedges, casting silver light across the garden. In 2 weeks, it would be complete, and Dominic's control would be tested. Tell me about the symptoms, I said finally, pulling my mind back to the practical problem before us. How does the madness manifest? He glanced at me, then away, his profile sharp in the moonlight. It begins subtly, increased aggression, difficulty sleeping. Then the shift becomes harder to control, occurring at unexpected moments. His voice tightened. Near the full moon, the wolf mind begins to dominate. Rational thought fades. Pack bonds weaken. The wolf no longer recognizes friend from foe, family from stranger. And the current tincture delays the symptoms, maintains clarity of thought during the change. His hands clenched at his sides. But its effectiveness diminishes with each passing moon. What once lasted 3 nights now barely gets us through one. I thought of the notes I'd been studying, the Queen's increasingly desperate attempts to strengthen the formula. Your mother tried adding more wolfsbane, and nearly killed my father in the process, he confirmed. The balance is delicate, too little, and the madness progresses. Too much, and the werewolf dies in agony. A new thought occurred to me. Have you taken the tincture yourself? Recently? He hesitated. 2 nights ago. And? It helped? Briefly, his jaw tightened. But I could feel the wolf fighting against it, stronger than before. An idea began to form in my mind. I need to observe the tincture's effects directly. See how it works, how it fails. I turned to him. I need to see you transform. Surprise flickered across his face. That's too dangerous. You said I'm under your protection, I reminded him. Does that only apply when it's convenient? His eyes narrowed slightly. You don't understand what you're asking. Even with the tincture, the wolf is unpredictable. I need to see what we're fighting, I insisted. Notes in a journal aren't enough. I need to observe, to understand. I took a deep breath. Tonight, take the tincture and let me witness the transformation. For a long moment, he simply stared at me, the amber of his eyes seeming to glow in the growing darkness. Finally, he nodded once, curtly. Very well, but not in the castle. There's a clearing in the forest, surrounded by mountain ash trees. The ash creates a natural boundary no werewolf can cross. A cage, I said softly. A precaution, he corrected. For your safety. As we turned back toward the workroom, I felt both fear and determination coursing through me. Tonight, I would see the wolf that lived beneath Dominic's human skin. Tonight, I would begin to truly understand what we faced. In the workroom, I gathered what I needed: the Queen's journal, writing materials, a small vial of the existing tincture. Naomi arrived as we were preparing to leave, her expression shifting from surprise to concern when Dominic explained our plans. "This is unwise, my king," she said, her tone respectful but firm. "The court already whispers about the human. Taking her into the forest at night will only fuel their suspicions." "Let them whisper," Dominic replied. "We have more important concerns than court gossip." Naomi's gaze flicked to me, then back to him. "At least allow me to accompany you, for additional protection." I expected Dominic to agree, but instead he shook his head. "No. I need you here, monitoring the nobles who seem most agitated by Aurora's presence. Report anything unusual directly to Samuel." Naomi looked as though she wanted to argue further, but she simply nodded. "As you wish, my king." As we prepared to depart through a servant's corridor that would allow us to leave the castle unobserved, Dominic handed me a cloak of dark green wool. "The nights grow cool," he said by way of explanation. I accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around my shoulders as we slipped through the corridor and out into the deepening night. The forest loomed ahead, dark and mysterious, and as we crossed the open ground between the castle and the tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes watched from the shadows. Whether those eyes belonged to friends or enemies remained to be seen. The forest enveloped us like a living entity, branches reaching overhead to block the moonlight, roots rising from the ground to catch at my feet. Dominic moved with preternatural grace, his hand occasionally brushing mine to guide me over fallen logs or around hidden ditches. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear it. "The forest is loyal to me, but not all its inhabitants are." I shivered at the implication, drawing the cloak tighter around my shoulders. "How much further?" "Not far." He paused, head tilting as though listening to something beyond human hearing. "The clearing lies just beyond that ridge." We climbed in silence, the slope growing steeper until we crested the hill, and the trees opened up to reveal a perfect circle of open ground. Silvery moonlight poured down, illuminating a ring of mountain ash trees surrounding the clearing, their pale bark gleaming like bones in the darkness. Dominic led me to the edge of the clearing, but stopped before entering it. "The mountain ash creates a barrier," he explained. "Once I cross into the circle, I won't be able to leave until dawn breaks the spell." "And if something goes wrong?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. His amber eyes studied me in the moonlight. "Nothing will go wrong, but if you feel unsafe, there's a path leading east from here. Follow it, and you'll reach the castle grounds." I nodded, though we both knew I wouldn't flee. I had come to observe, to understand, and I wouldn't leave until I had what I needed. Dominic reached into his pocket and withdrew a small vial, the tincture we'd brought from the workroom. "Once I drink this, the change will begin within minutes," he said, voice tight with control. "The tincture should allow me to maintain my human mind. But..." He hesitated. "If my eyes turn blood red instead of remaining amber, run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run." The warning sent ice through my veins, but I nodded again. "I understand." He held my gaze for a moment longer, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he turned and stepped into the clearing, the tincture clutched in his hand. In the center of the circle, Dominic stopped and looked back at me one last time. I remained at the edge, journal open on my lap, quill poised to record observations. With a single fluid motion, he uncorked the vial and drank its contents, his throat working as he swallowed the bitter liquid. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Dominic gasped, dropping to one knee as though struck. His back arched, muscles visibly rippling beneath his shirt. He gripped his own arms, fingers elongating, nails sharpening into claws that tore through the fine fabric of his sleeves. I wrote frantically, documenting every detail of the transformation. The way his jaw extended, teeth lengthening into fangs, how his shoulders broadened, spine curving as his body reconfigured itself. The sound, a terrible grinding of bones and sinew that made my stomach clench in sympathy. Throughout it all, Dominic made no sound beyond harsh, panting breaths. His control was impressive, terrifying, Even in agony, he refused to scream. The transformation took less than 2 minutes, but felt like an eternity. When it finished, the creature that stood in the clearing was neither fully wolf nor fully man, but something between, taller than a human, covered in dark fur, standing on powerful hind legs, while front limbs ended in deadly claws. The face was elongated into a muzzle filled with gleaming teeth, yet retained enough human features that I could still see Dominic in the bone structure. Most importantly, the eyes that locked with mine remained amber, not blood red. The tincture had worked, at least for now. "Dominic?" I called softly. The werewolf nodded once, a jerky motion that suggested maintaining control required effort. He took a few experimental steps, movements fluid despite the changed anatomy. Then he spoke, his voice deeper, rougher, but still recognizable. "The tincture is working," he said, the words slurring slightly around his fangs. "For now." I rose and approached the ring of mountain ash trees, stopping just outside their boundary. This close, I could see the fine tremors running through Dominic's transformed body, the way his clawed hands clenched and unclenched as though fighting against some invisible force. "How does it feel?" I asked, pen ready to record his response. He paced a small circle, like a caged animal, like fire in my veins, like two minds battling for control. He stopped, facing me. "The wolf wants to run, to hunt. It sees the boundary as a challenge, not a protection. And how does that compare to previous transformations?" A growl rumbled from his chest. "Stronger. The wolf's desires are more insistent than before." I made note of this, mind already working on potential adjustments to the formula. The Queen's notes had mentioned similar progressions, the wolf mind growing stronger with each transformation, the human consciousness struggling to maintain dominance. For nearly an hour, I questioned him about the sensation, the balance between human thought and wolf instinct, the physical effects of the tincture. Dominic answered with remarkable clarity, though as time passed, his responses grew shorter, more guttural. Then, without warning, he doubled over with a snarl of pain. "Dominic?" I stood, alarmed by the sudden change. He raised his head, and my blood froze. One eye remained amber, but the other had darkened to a deep crimson. "Run!" he growled, the word barely recognizable. I stood frozen, unable to tear my gaze away as he thrashed against the invisible boundary created by the mountain ash trees. His claws dug furrows in the earth, his howls becoming less human with each passing moment. The tincture was failing, faster than either of us had anticipated. "Aurora!" His voice broke through, momentarily human despite the monstrous form. "The journal, it mentioned blood!" He convulsed again, both eyes now flashing between amber and red. "Heart's blood freely given, I think it meant..." Whatever he meant to say was lost, as a howl tore from his throat, echoing through the forest with primal fury. His eyes settled into a deep, terrifying red. The human consciousness I'd been speaking with was gone, submerged beneath the madness of the wolf. I backed away slowly, remembering his warning to run if his eyes turned red, but something kept me rooted in place. The memory of his words, cut short by the transformation. Heart's blood freely given. It was part of the Queen's final notes, a phrase I'd puzzled over for days. The werewolf that had been Dominic hurled himself against the invisible barrier, claws slashing at air. The mountain ash held, but for how long? The rage in those blood-red eyes suggested a strength beyond normal constraints. Heart's blood freely given, not taken, not coerced, but given. An idea formed, terrible and perfect in its simplicity. I set the journal down carefully on a flat stone and reached into my pocket for the small silver knife I'd brought to trim herbs. The blade gleamed in the moonlight as I drew it across my palm, deep enough to bleed but not to cripple. Blood welled up, dark in the moonlight. Heart's blood, human blood, freely given. The werewolf froze at the scent, nostrils flaring, red eyes fixing on my bleeding hand. "Dominic," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is freely given. To help you." I stepped forward and pressed my bleeding palm against the invisible barrier created by the mountain ash trees. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then my blood seemed to ignite, glowing with an internal light that spread along the boundary of the circle. The werewolf snarled, backing away from the illuminated barrier. I pressed harder, feeling a strange tingling where my blood contacted the magical boundary. The Queen's journal had never explicitly mentioned blood magic, but the implications had been there in her fragmented notes. Something about essence freely given creating a bond that could anchor the human mind during transformation. "Remember who you are," I said, putting every ounce of conviction into my words. "Remember your mother's work. Remember why you brought me here." The werewolf stalked back and forth, agitation visible in every line of its powerful body. But it was listening. The red eyes remained fixed on me, something flickering behind them. Recognition, perhaps, or the struggle of Dominic's consciousness trying to resurface. I began to speak more steadily, reminding him of our conversations, of the garden, of his responsibility to his people. With each word, I pressed my bleeding hand more firmly against the barrier, feeling the strange magic of it responding to my offering. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My arm ached, my hand throbbed, and still I maintained contact, watching as the werewolf's movements became less erratic, as clarity slowly returned to those terrible red eyes. Finally, when my legs trembled with fatigue and my voice had grown hoarse, the crimson began to fade from Dominic's gaze, amber reclaiming its rightful place. He staggered, catching himself on hands and knees, head bowed as shudders racked his massive frame. "Aurora," he gasped, my name distorted by his transformed mouth, but unmistakable all the same. Relief washed through me so powerfully that my knees nearly buckled. "I'm here," I answered. He lifted his head, amber eyes clear with recognition. "What did you do?" I pulled my hand away from the barrier, wincing as dried blood cracked and fresh blood welled up. "Tested a theory." Before he could respond, a chorus of howls rose from the forest beyond the ridge, closer than comfort would allow, and moving in our direction. Dominic's head snapped up, ears flattening against his skull. "The feral court," he growled. "They've found us." Fear clenched my stomach. How? No one knew we were coming here except Naomi. They must have followed our scent. He rose to his full height, towering and terrifying despite the intelligence now evident in his gaze. "You need to run, Aurora. Now," I shook my head. "I can't leave you trapped in this circle." "The mountain ash protects me as much as it contains me," he insisted. "But it won't protect you. They'll tear you apart the moment they realize what you are, what you're trying to do." The howls grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of undergrowth being trampled beneath heavy paws. We had minutes, perhaps less. "Take this," I said, thrusting the journal into my cloak pocket and shrugging the garment off. I pushed it through the barrier, surprised when it passed through easily. "It carries my scent. It might help when, you regain control." Dominic caught the cloak, clawed fingers surprisingly gentle with the fabric. "Go east as I told you. Don't stop until you reach the castle. Find Naomi or Samuel, no one else." I hesitated, torn between self-preservation and reluctance to abandon him. "Your eyes, they changed back." The blood did something. "We'll discuss it when we're both safe," he said, urgency making his voice harsh. "Go!" The sound of snapping branches galvanized me into action. I turned and plunged into the forest, following the path Dominic had indicated. Behind me, I heard a roar, Dominic's challenge to the approaching threat, followed by answering howls that raised the hair on my neck. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The path was barely visible in the darkness, little more than a game trail winding between ancient trees. My lungs burned, and the cut on my palm throbbed in time with my racing heartbeat. The sounds of combat faded behind me, though I couldn't tell if that was due to distance or because the fight had ended. I didn't dare slow down to find out. "East," Dominic had said. "Follow the path east to the castle." A new sound reached my ears, water rushing over rocks. The path curved toward it, leading me to a narrow stream gleaming silver in the moonlight. I paused just long enough to dip my bleeding hand into the cold water, gasping at the sting. The current washed away the blood, though the cut continued to seep. As I straightened, A twig snapped behind me. I whirled, expecting, hoping, to see Dominic. Instead, a massive gray werewolf emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing crimson in the darkness. Unlike Dominic's transformed state, nothing human remained in this creature's gaze. Only hunger and primal rage. A member of the feral court, sent to hunt me down while others dealt with their trapped king. I backed away slowly, knowing I couldn't outrun it, couldn't fight it. My only hope lay in reaching the castle grounds, where loyal guards might intercept us. But the castle was still too far, the beast too close. The werewolf stalked forward, muzzle pulling back to reveal gleaming fangs. It clearly intended to savor this kill, to draw out my terror before striking. I continued retreating until my back hit the rough trunk of a massive oak tree, trapped, with nowhere left to run. Block 5. Time seemed to slow as the gray werewolf advanced. My mind raced through desperate options. Climb the tree? No. It would simply wait below or climb after me. Run? It would catch me in seconds. Fight? With what? My small silver knife was a toothpick compared to those claws. Then I remembered my mother's pendant, still hanging around my neck. The symbol of the alliance between healers and werewolves. I pulled it out with my uninjured hand, holding it forward like a talisman. I am a healer, I said, voice steadier than I felt. Protected by ancient pact. The werewolf paused, crimson eyes fixing on the wooden pendant. For one breathless moment, I thought it might actually work, that some vestige of honor remained even in these feral minds. Then the creature lunged, powerful hind legs launching it directly toward me. I ducked instinctively, diving to the side as claws raked the tree bark where I'd stood. Splinters flew, showering my hair and shoulders as I scrambled away on hands and knees. The werewolf snarled in frustration, whirling to face me again. As it gathered itself for another attack, a blur of dark fur crashed into it from the side. The two massive bodies tumbled across the forest floor, a maelstrom of claws and fangs and furious growls. I pressed myself against a fallen log, heart pounding so hard it seemed to shake my entire body. The newcomer was darker, larger, Dominic. Somehow he'd escaped the mountain ash circle. Somehow he'd tracked me through the forest. The two werewolves fought with terrifying ferocity, tearing at each other with claws that could rend flesh from bone. Blood darkened their fur, black in the moonlight. Impossible to tell whose was whose. The gray werewolf fought with wild abandon, driven by bloodlust and rage. But Dominic fought with purpose, with control born of the human mind that still guided his actions. Even as they tumbled and slashed, I could see the strategy in his movements, protecting his throat, targeting his opponent's vulnerable points, conserving energy where possible. Finally, Dominic managed to pin the gray werewolf beneath him, one clawed hand at its throat, his other hand raised, prepared to deliver a killing blow. But he hesitated, amber eyes meeting crimson, recognition flickering across his transformed features. The gray werewolf took advantage of that moment of mercy, bucking upward with enough force to throw Dominic off balance. It scrambled to its feet, backing away, clearly reassessing the fight. For a tense moment, the two werewolves circled each other, neither willing to commit to another exchange. Then, with a final snarl of defiance, the gray werewolf turned and fled, disappearing into the underbrush with startling speed. The sound of its retreat faded quickly, leaving only the normal nighttime chorus of insects and wind. Dominic remained tense, head turning as he tracked the other werewolf's departure, with senses far more acute than mine. Only when he seemed certain the threat had truly withdrawn did he turn to me, amber eyes gleaming in the darkness. I stood slowly, wincing as my cut palm left a bloody smear on the fallen log. "You escaped the circle," I said, stating the obvious because I couldn't think of anything else to say. He approached cautiously, as though afraid of frightening me after what I'd witnessed. When he spoke, his voice was rough, but intelligible around his fangs. "The blood magic you discovered, it did more than restore my control. It temporarily negated the mountain ash barrier." I touched the wooden pendant still clutched in my hand. "That's not mentioned in the Queen's journal." "Perhaps she never tested it," he replied. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such a fearsome creature. He reached for my injured hand. "You're still bleeding." I allowed him to examine the cut, his claws careful not to touch my skin as he assessed the damage. "It's not deep," I assured him. "Deep enough to save my mind," he countered. His amber eyes met mine. "Heart's blood freely given. My mother wrote of it. But I never understood until tonight." A rustling in the undergrowth made us both tense, but the figure that emerged was Naomi, her own transformation more subtle than Dominic's. Eyes glowing, features sharper, movements more fluid, but still recognizably human. "My king," she said, dropping to one knee before rising again quickly. "The castle is secure, but Counselor Thaddeus is missing, along with several guards loyal to him." Dominic growled low in his throat. "Thaddeus, I suspected as much." "The feral court?" I asked. Naomi nodded grimly. "We believe he's been their contact within the castle walls. When he realized you'd both left together tonight." She trailed off, implications clear. "He set a trap," Dominic finished. "Or tried to." He looked back at me. "We need to return to the castle immediately. The forest isn't safe, and dawn is still hours away." The journey back was tense but uneventful. Dominic led, his transformed state allowing him to detect threats long before they approached. Naomi guarded the rear, occasionally disappearing into the shadows only to reappear minutes later with whispered reports of movement deeper in the forest. I walked between them, cradling my injured hand against my chest, mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered tonight. Heart's blood freely given, not just as an ingredient in the tincture, but as a catalyst for a deeper magic. Something that could break through barriers both physical and mental. The castle rose before us as we emerged from the tree line, torches illuminating the walls where guards patrolled in pairs. Dominic led us to a small side entrance, one I hadn't known existed, concealed behind a growth of ivy and accessible only with a key Naomi produced from a chain around her neck. "My chambers," Dominic instructed once we were inside. "We can't risk being seen in the main corridors." We traversed narrow servant passages and hidden staircases, eventually emerging into a hallway I recognized, the one outside my own chambers. Dominic's rooms were directly across from mine, just as he'd said that first night. His chambers were expansive but surprisingly austere, a large sitting room appointed with functional furniture rather than ostentatious luxury, a study lined with books and maps, and beyond, glimpses of a bedchamber similarly restrained in its furnishings. "Naomi, fetch Samuel," Dominic instructed as we entered, "and bring medical supplies for Aurora's hand." As Naomi departed, Dominic moved to a sideboard and poured water from a silver pitcher into a basin. The simple action seemed incongruous with his transformed state, this creature of nightmare performing such a mundane task. "Your hand," he said, gesturing to the basin. I approached hesitantly, aware of how vulnerable I was alone with him, even with his mind apparently clear. The events in the clearing had proven how quickly control could be lost. As if sensing my thoughts, he stepped back, creating distance between us. "I won't harm you, Aurora. The tincture has failed, but what you did with your blood, it created a different kind of anchor." I dipped my injured hand into the cool water, watching as dried blood dissolved in crimson swirls. It wasn't mentioned in the Queen's notes, not explicitly, but she wrote about heart's blood freely given and bonds that transcend the physical. "My mother believed in old magic," Dominic said, moving to the window to gaze out at the moonlit grounds. "Magic that existed before werewolves, before humans drew lines between species. Blood magic, bond magic." He turned back to me, his transformed face solemn. "Magic that requires sacrifice." A shiver ran through me. What kind of sacrifice? Before he could answer, the door opened to admit Naomi and a tall, broad-shouldered man I assumed was Samuel. Unlike Naomi, he showed no signs of werewolf heritage, entirely human in appearance, though the sword at his hip and the scars visible on his hands spoke of a warrior's life. "My king," Samuel said, bowing slightly. His gaze flickered to me, then back to Dominic. "The castle is secure. Thaddeus's quarters have been searched, and we found evidence of his treachery. Correspondence with known feral court sympathizers." And Thaddeus himself? Dominic asked. Samuel shook his head. No sign. He likely fled when he realized his trap had failed. Naomi set a small box of medical supplies beside the basin where I still stood. Without comment, she opened it and began cleaning my wound properly, applying a salve that smelled of honey and thyme before wrapping it with clean linen. Thank you, I murmured. She nodded once, eyes assessing me with new respect. The king told me what you did. Blood magic is rare, powerful, dangerous. I didn't know what I was doing, I admitted. It was instinct. The best magic often is, she replied cryptically before stepping away. Dominic issued quiet orders to Samuel regarding increased security and the questioning of guards known to be close to Thaddeus. As they spoke, I found myself studying Dominic's transformed state with a healer's analytical eye, rather than a human's fear. Even in this form, he moved with grace and purpose. His voice remained recognizably his own despite the altered vocal cords. Most importantly, his eyes stayed amber, showing no signs of returning to that terrible crimson. Whatever my blood had done, its effects appeared stable, at least for now. When Samuel departed, Dominic turned back to me. You should rest, he said. It's been a revealing night. How long will you remain transformed? I asked, professional curiosity overriding exhaustion. Until dawn, he replied. The moon's power wanes with the sun. I nodded, making mental notes for the Queen's journal. And my blood? How does it feel different from the tincture? A hint of amusement flickered in his amber eyes. Always the healer, even after nearly being killed. Knowledge keeps me alive, I countered. Understanding what happened tonight might be the key to creating a permanent cure. His expression sobered. It feels cooler, like a stream running beneath the fire of the wolf's instincts. The tincture suppresses the wolf. Your blood integrates it. He flexed clawed hands, studying them. I am both, rather than two minds battling for control. Integration, rather than suppression. The concept aligned with the Queen's final notes, where she'd begun exploring harmony between the dual natures, rather than dominance of one over the other. I need to return to the workroom at first light, I said. With what we've learned tonight, I might be able to modify the tincture. Dominic nodded. Rest first. Naomi will escort you to your chambers. As I turned to leave, a thought occurred to me. The werewolf in the forest, you knew him. Dominic's expression darkened. My brother, Julian, once heir to the throne, now lost to the madness, his massive shoulders slumped slightly. He was the first to turn feral 3 years ago. Now he leads the feral court against us. The revelation stunned me. You could have killed him tonight. Why didn't you? Amber eyes met mine, filled with centuries of sorrow. Because he is my brother still, no matter what the madness has made him. And because I still hope for a cure, for all of us. The weight of that hope settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. I was no longer simply creating a tincture. I was trying to save a family, a kingdom, a future where humans and werewolves might coexist. We'll find it, I promised softly. Together. Dawn arrived with gentle persistence, bathing my chambers in golden light. I had slept fitfully, dreams filled with crimson eyes and blood magic, and the memory of Dominic's transformed face looking at me with recognition despite the beast he had become. Naomi arrived with breakfast and news. Thaddeus remained missing, but several of his co-conspirators had been captured. The castle was secure, though tension ran high among the nobles as rumors spread about the king's midnight excursion with the human herbalist. They're afraid, Naomi explained as I dressed for the day. Change frightens those who benefit from the current order, even if that order leads to madness? I asked, pinning my hair back from my face. She smiled thinly, especially then. In the workroom, I found Dominic already waiting, restored to his human form, though dark circles beneath his eyes suggested the transformation had taken its toll. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, reminiscent of our walk in the garden days earlier. "How is your hand?" he asked by way of greeting. I held it up, showing the neat bandage Naomi had applied. "Healing. And you? After the transformation?" "Better than expected." He moved to the window, gazing out at the garden below. The effects of your blood magic lingered even after I returned to human form. I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The implications sent my mind racing with possibilities. The Queen's final notes. She wasn't just trying to control the transformation. She was seeking harmony between the dual natures. Dominic nodded. A balance that would prevent the madness entirely. Not wolfsbane to suppress, but human blood freely given to harmonize, I continued, excitement building as pieces clicked into place. The missing page from her journal contained the formula for permanent integration rather than temporary suppression, he finished. I moved to the work table where the Queen's journal lay open, flipping to the final pages. She mentioned lunar eclipse essence, harvested during the alignment of sun and moon, when neither fully dominates. The next lunar eclipse is in 11 days, Dominic said. One day before the full moon, our eyes met across the table, the same realization dawning in both our minds. Barely enough time, I whispered. But possible, he countered. With your knowledge and my mother's notes. And heart's blood freely given, I added, touching my bandaged palm. Dominic's expression softened, something beyond gratitude in his gaze. You risked your life for mine last night. Why? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at the journal, buying time to sort through my own tangled emotions. Because you offered me a way out of that cell. Because your mother's work deserves completion. Because... I hesitated, then met his eyes directly. Because I saw humanity in you worth saving. He moved around the table until we stood face to face. And if saving that humanity requires more sacrifice, more blood magic, then it will be freely given, I said simply. Something shifted in his amber eyes, hope, perhaps, or the first fragile beginnings of trust. His hand reached for mine, careful of the bandage as his fingers intertwined with my uninjured ones. 11 days, he said softly, to create a cure, to stop my brother and the feral court, to save our kinds from endless war. I tightened my grip on his hand, feeling the strength there, the control that kept the wolf contained within human skin. 11 days to find balance, to create harmony where there has only been conflict. Outside, the sun climbed higher, bathing the workroom in golden light. Below in the garden, herbs swayed in the morning breeze, waiting to be harvested, to be transformed into something greater than the sum of their parts. Just as Dominic was more than simply man or wolf, just as I was more than simply prisoner or healer. Together, we turned to the Queen's journal, to the work that lay ahead, the creation of a cure that might bridge the divide between human and werewolf, between past and future. The pendant hung warm against my skin, a reminder of legacy and responsibility, of promises made by my mother and Dominic's, now renewed in our own determination. 11 days to create a miracle. 11 days to change the world. We began.